Hi, and welcome to Spring Gardening in partnership with Hocking Valley Community Hospital. My name is Tim McDermott. I work for OSU Extension in Agriculture and Natural Resources in Franklin County, but just a few short years ago, I was the Ag and Natural Resources Educator in Hocking County, and I used to do programs with Hocking Valley Community Hospital, and they were an outstanding partner locally. And as I was saying to Latricia early on, I miss Paradise, and just so you know, the greatest unsung dining room in all of Hocking County is the cafeteria at Hocking Valley Community Hospital, where you can
True
get your
fact.
health on for $2.
That's right, true fact.
So if you're not familiar with Extension, and you may or may not be, but what we are is we are the outreach arm of the university. So I work in the program area of Ag and Natural Resources. We have three other program areas, which is CD, Community Development, which is Financial Literacy and Leadership, FCS, Family and Consumer Science, which is nutrition and dietetics. And then we have our youth leadership and development program area where lots of people know us, and that is 4-H. We are the outreach arm of the university. We are county focused. When I'm in Franklin County, I don't face into the university. I face out to my 1.3 million client residents of Franklin County. We have a office in all 88. So think about my garden plan going forward for 2021, I have to look and see what happened in 2020. And hey, 2020 was an interesting year. We have a lot to look back at, but we have a lot more to look forward to. So I always kind of make decisions on things that I did and things that didn't work out, because I like to change up my garden plan each year. So you look at the top left, there's a cornfield. I grew corn last year. I grow it about every 10 years. That's how long it takes me to forget how much I hate growing corn. And then I plant it again. But what happens is the raccoons eat it, the deer eat it, the birds eat it. Everybody eats it but me. And so I'm going to be buying corn this year, and I have not. This countdown starts now. 9 more years, no corn. And then in the middle, those are peas. And for the first time in this will be my 25th year as a community gardener. And year 24, I did not plant peas for the same reason. Everything eats them. And the problem is you plant them first. And we had 7 deer that came to my community garden reliably, and they found that I had the earliest food first, which means they hit my garden all the time. On the right is leeks. I will definitely plant leeks again this year. I meant to buy plants, but last year we had this tremendous run on plants and plant materials secondary to COVID, and everybody wanted to learn how to grow, and everybody went home and they were told, stay away from people, but do fun stuff outside. And so everybody wanted to learn how to grow their own food. And so they bought every last seed pot and whatnot in the world. But this year I got leek seed early. I've already started them in my basement. I might even have a picture of them. So getting back to the peas, I can't stay away from peas. I'm not growing the giant 6-foot tall sugar snaps. I'm growing 2-foot tall sugar and I can protect those a little bit easier because they're smaller. I'll use row cover or similar. That's what you see in this fabric here. This is hoops over a row cover, which is a season extension fabric. And the nice thing about it is, while a groundhog will tear right through the middle of this mystifies deer. So I'm hoping to get some peas this year. But like I was saying, if you have not bought your seeds and your soil and your grow lights and all of the things that you like to use, start looking at your various sources. There's some places that are still in stock. Some have run out of certain things. If you want your favorite, don't delay. So site selection, if you are just getting started in gardening, and a lot of people are just getting started. I actually, before I even took this call, I took 3 calls where people wanted to figure out how to get started in gardening. We're still under COVID social distance protocols, and people really are enjoying growing their own food. I basically only teach really well on growing food. I don't know anything about flowers. If I can't eat it, I don't grow it. When you grow food, when you're growing veg, herbs, fruit, whatever, they all like full bore sun as much as you can get, meaning you want a south face, you want to avoid trees and avoid buildings. So you'll see in some places where it says vegetables need at least 8 hours of sun. Then you'll see in other places, vegetables need at least 8 to 10 hours of sun, and that's close. They need 8 to 10 hours of sun, and then they need the other 8 to 10 hours of sun. The sun in June is 15, 16 hours. So full sun works best, but I know that that's not quite possible for a lot of growers, right? You might grow on the side of your garage. Maybe you just get east side, maybe you just get west side sun half a day. That's where the term right plant, right place comes in. For example, you want to grow tomatoes. Everybody wants to grow tomatoes. They're the taste of summer. You can only grow them where you get half-day sun. What I would recommend you do is take a look at the variety, take a look at the maturation time for those tomatoes. There are plenty of tomatoes that will mature fairly rapidly. Cherry tomatoes, saladette tomatoes, early girls, first ladies, things like that have a rapid maturation period, where if you look at some of those big, huge heirloom slicers, like a Brandywine, they literally mature 30 days past that date. So you would pick the variety that's going to mature quicker because you have less sun. That would be the way that you would be able to still get production even if you can't get full sun. Watering is similar. When you site your garden, figure out where your water source is, because if your plan is to haul water to that site, water is heavy. A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. And when we talk about the irrigation needs in the middle of summer for fruit, vegetable, and herbs, they need a minimum of an inch of rain per square foot. In production, that can be higher, and when it's 90 degrees, it can be higher than that. You might have to haul 2 gallons for every square foot of your garden per week. And if you have a 4x8 raised bed, which is a common size, right? 3 boards, cut one in half, and then nail them all together, that is 32 square feet. You might need to triple that, meaning you are hauling hundreds of pounds of water per week. So site it where you can get water to it. Make sure that you realize that while Mother Nature likes to rain on our produce, you want to water at the base of the produce. You don't want to soak the leaves. That can predispose them to fungal disease. Fungal disease is the enemy of plants that is overrepresented in terms of what is their diseases that they get. So take your hose, irrigate at the base of the plant. That way you know it's soaking deep into the soil. And honestly, a great deep watering once per week is better than 5 shallow waterings per week. So make sure you water deeply. You want to get that moisture all the way down into the root zone of the plants. That might be 4, 6, 8, 10 inches deep. I teach, especially where I teach now, which is backyard gardeners or community gardeners in an urban agricultural setting. We don't have tons and tons of land. I don't have a back 40 that I get to tear up and grow in. So I like to teach the bio-intensive method. And what that does is it prioritizes focusing your inputs in that small space, focusing your organic matter, making that raised bed where you can build your soil up a little bit deeper. Raised beds are a great technique to grow in because once you build them, you never walk in them. You have minimal tillage needs because since you're not compacting them by walking in there, you don't really need to get in with the rototiller. You put your fertilizer in that space, you put your water in that space, you put your plants in that space, your mulch goes in that space, and so you only have that space. You don't have to worry about doing work around in the paths, and so it makes everything easier. It facilitates season extension. I like to grow all 12 months of the year. Believe it or not, I can harvest things out of my garden right now, kale and spinach that I have covered and grew over winter, even though we had a foot of snow cumulative in February and it iced over all my plants. They were protected. And I have harvested spinach, kale, bok choy waiting for me when I get back from vacation. I'm in Florida. Hi, guys. Integrated pest management is the other thing that I like to prioritize. And what that means is you can't really rely on a pesticide to take care of a pest anymore. One, we have resistance issues. 2, there's residue issues where you're putting pesticides on your food. And 3, we have to be mindful of our pollinators. There's insects that are beneficial out there that are our friends working on behalf of us to actually make sure we get food. Integrated pest management means you do use pesticides smartly at the right time in the right time windows, mining your pollinators, but you do other things like crop rotations and mulching and maximizing your soil health and picking resistant varieties and scouting for pests so that you know when they're there in small numbers so you can be smart about your management. It's a strategy of doing lots of little things to get that bigger effect as opposed to just hammering with pesticides, which may not work in the first place. So the other thing, and I see a lot of folks that struggle with this, when we plant for harvest, when we are planting and we want to harvest lots and lots of vegetables, think how many cherry tomatoes you can pull off a cherry tomato plant that you plant in maybe mid to late May, and it grows and you harvest it until October. And by that point, it is 9 feet tall. It requires an amazing amount of nutrients. Plants have a certain level of major macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, a whole bunch of minor nutrients. Believe it or not, if they're deficient in any of them, even something like molybdenum that might be needed in parts per million, that is a critical nutrient for something that plant is doing, some cell wall thing, some enzymatic pathway, who knows? But make sure that you realize that we are dealing with heavy feeders generally when we have fruit or we have veg, and you will go through lots of work with your garden prep and you will source the most beautiful plants and seeds ever. And if you plant them and you don't have the fertility that is needed to get your harvest, you won't get your harvest. How do you find out? You do a soil test. A soil test basically reads several of the macro and micronutrients in there. You tell them what you want to grow, and then they give you the recommendation for fertilization for your vegetable, for your lawn, for your orchard, for whatever you're growing. They will tell you what fertility is needed based on them doing laboratory testing of your soil. You can contact your extension office and they can get you in charge of how to get a soil test. Then we add fertilizer, and we add it in different forms because different forms are needed because it really depends on how you grow, right? On the far left, you have a bag of slow release granular fertilizer. Generally, that's listed to feed for what, 2 months, maybe 3 months. Then you have your water-based, right? There's the Miracle Grow. You guys all have seen it. That's the blue crystals you mix in your watering can and you water. That's a more rapid form of the fertilizer that might be listed to feed every 1 to 2 weeks. And then you have foliar, where you literally mist a nutrient enriched water on your plants, and then some of the nutrients can be taken up through the leaves. Generally, I use a combination of the first two very commonly. When I am planting, say, a tomato transplant in the ground, I'm going to put a bunch of granular fertilizer in the hole. That breaks down slowly over time and it feeds my tomatoes for 2 or 3 months. But the tomatoes are going to be there for probably 4 or 5 months. So I probably need to do more fertilizing to make sure that when you get to the heavy harvest, when they need the fertilizer the most, right, say August, that you're adding more fertilizer into the system. You could top dress and sprinkle some more of that granular. It will break down and move through the soil profile as you irrigate, or you could mix up some water soluble. While the granular gets broken down slowly and feeds the roots over time, a water-based fertilizer will go right there. It's in a form that is much more rapidly available to the plants, but it doesn't last as long. And then keep in mind rainfall, because the guidelines that are on these fertilization methods is what would be there in an average amount of irrigation. But when we get these 3-inch rains, which we get now commonly, you might find that you watered your plants with a nutrient enriched water thinking you would get 2 weeks, and 2 days later you get a 3-inch rain and that fertilizer is about 8 feet down. So make sure that you take the effect of Mother Nature's irrigation into where your fertilizer possibly is in the ground. So organic matter is a wonderful thing, and I try to prioritize adding organic matter into my system as well as minimizing the loss of organic matter in my system. And that can be any number of things: compost, well composted manure, cover crops can be grown and then incorporated in the soil. Leaves are an amazing organic matter. 50 to 80% of a tree's nutrients are in the leaves, which is more per pound than manure. And this is a picture right here of the giant compost piles that were over by the Logan Community Garden. And when the city would collect the leaves, they would back the trucks up and dump the leaves in big piles. Now, this picture's from years ago. I don't even know if it's still there, but when it was there, it was unlimited free leaf compost that you could dig yourself. This was right next to the Logan Community Garden, and people would take this compost and put it right in their beds, and then they would increase the organic matter. Organic matter percentage is important because that percentage is where the magic is. That's the interaction of a lot of the fertility that is affects the soil holding capacity of your or your nutrient holding capacity of your soil. It affects the water holding capacity of your soil. And so the more you can add and the ways that you can do to mitigate the loss of organic matter are important. Now, one thing to note in this picture, and I hadn't noted it until I actually put this picture in the PowerPoint, the green vegetation that's growing on top is weeds. In fact, that's poison hemlock. And so make sure that you understand that This is a slow compost pile process, right? They just dump these leaves and they break down over time. Weed seeds survive that. Disease survives that. You only really make a compost effectively sterile in a hot process, which is where you're constantly mixing your compost with the ratios of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and water perfect so that it actually heats up to a level of 140, 150, 160 degrees and kills those things. So understand that where your compost comes from, it might come with some travelers. I understand that. I compost at my house. It's a cold compost process. I try not to add any diseased plants in it. I try to not add any seeds in it. But sometimes that gets in there. I will say that the best pumpkins that I grow are not grown in my garden. They're the ones that sprout out of my compost pile. So we talked about raised beds earlier, but let's just revisit them for a second. These are the raised beds from years ago when I was first working down at HapCap at the Southeastern Ohio Regional Kitchen, and we put in some raised beds to grow food there to feed right into the food pantry. This was actually filled with that leaf compost from the compost pile down by the Logan Community. And it was amazingly fertile. Now, we did have some weeds pop up periodically, but I planted in pure compost, and boy, we got great harvest down there. So a raised bed is generally 3 foot or 4 foot wide maximum, unless you have super giant long arms, because you don't walk in this, you reach from the outside and you work into it, meaning you never step on it, you never compact it, meaning the roots have no restrictions for how big and how deep they can get, and a healthy root system is very important for that plant. Then I only water in here. I put mulch around the outside of the bed so that I don't have any weeds out there. Whoop, get back here. And that allows me to concentrate all of my inputs in that space into super fertile soil. You can actually get more production out of this system than you could in a row crop system, because when you plant in rows, you have to weed your rows. You have to, when you water, everything goes throughout the entire system. And then as you walk up and down your rows, you are walking on the roots of the plants and you're compacting that. And that makes it less likely for them to be able to take up nutrients. Have a ton of space, go for it. I do a little bit of row growing in my garden when I used to do corn, right? Because corn is going to, I planted my corn in rows. I would walk up and down my rows, but I'm not doing corn this year like we talked about. I'm buying my corn. So 3 or 4 feet wide is ideal. 3 feet, believe it or not, is what I recommend if you are doing like an educational garden for students, because students generally have arms that are only about 18 to 20 inches long. And I know that because I measured student arms before. And so they basically need a 3 foot bed so that they don't step in it. Now they're kids, so they still walk all the way through it, but at least you built it right from the beginning. And then run your numbers, okay? If you build a 6 foot, 4 by 8 foot raised bed, and maybe you use 2 by 6s, so they're 6 inches tall. That 4 by 8 is 32 square feet times 6 inches tall, which is 16 cubic feet. That is a lot of soil, okay? That is a bunch of bags of soil. If you order it in bulk, keep in mind a cubic yard of soil is 27 cubic feet. That is a huge amount. That's a whole pickup truck. And so run your numbers when you do your raised bed construction to make sure that you understand how much soil you need to fill it, because you want to fill them to the tippy top. The more soil, the better, right? That's what the plant is going to grow in. They can grow down through that soil and into the ground. Now, I want to stress something about raised beds. I keep talking about forms and building them out of things, and a lot of people do that because it's a way to get more height. But raised bed growing is a concept. The original raised beds that were built were made 4 feet wide for the same reason I talked about. You had pathways and you never walk on the space where the plants are growing, but they were really just shaped by a garden rake to get about 3 inches tall. You still get all the benefits of raised beds. You get increased drainage, you get increased soil permeability and tilth with decreased compactions. You concentrate your work in there. They actually warm up a little bit faster in the spring, so you can plant a little earlier because they're raised and they actually will absorb heat through the sides. But it is a concept. You can make them 3 inches tall, shaped with a garden rake. That's what I do in my garden. But if you want more height, you generally have to build a form, because once you get about over 3 or 4 inches tall, that soil is just going to slump out and it's going to go down to 3 or 4 inches tall anyway. But there's lots of cool ways. People used to ask me all the time, Tim, what's the ideal thing to build raised beds out of on that's going to last forever and have no toxicity? And I could not come up with anything that would come up with this. And then somebody did. This was a raised bed that was built out of Bishop Educational Gardens for a class that we did. And this is white oak lumber facings, which you can get down in Hocking County. White oak is extraordinarily weather resistant. This is a beautiful raised bed. It was pinned together by nails and screws at the corner, and it makes a dynamic and beautiful thing to grow in. And that white oak will last longer than I will, I'll tell you that much. But here's a picture of my community garden. And I do raised bed growing. I have my defined pathways on the outside. They're about 3.5 feet wide, and I just shape them with a garden rake. My community garden is huge. It is a Victory Garden remnant. It's multi-acre. It doesn't have any kind of permanence to it. It gets bush hogged at the end of the season, and then a Ford tractor pulls a giant rototiller and tills it all up at the beginning of the season, so we can't leave any forms in there. So I make my raised beds just shaped with a garden rake each year, lay down plasticulture mulch for my pathways, pull everything up at the end before the bush hog comes through. So let's talk about mulch for a second, because I've been talking about it. Mulch is a unbelievably awesome, probably the #1 tool in the toolbox of a grower, because it does so many wonderful things. It can be an organic thing. In that picture right there is hay. That's just spoiled horse hay. You could use straw. You could use leaves. In the bottom picture, that is black landscape fabric, which is a plasticulture mulch. That is not fabric like a garbage bag fabric. This is woven. It is super heavy duty. It's a product that has come out of the nursery and landscape sort of world. And what it is it's woven and permeable. So it's completely impenetrable to weeds, but oxygen and water can move through it. And so I like to use it because it's just bomb proof. And this is a place by my building at work where I put in a raised bed demonstration garden. I put that down because no weeds will ever get through it. And then I put some mulch on top of it just because it's a little bit more decorative. But what mulch does is several things. One, it conserves moisture, and your plants want moisture. Two, it cools the soil. Ideally, plants like to grow in soil that's probably around 60 to 70 degrees in terms of soil temperature. And when you have uncovered soil on a 95-degree July day, that top layer of soil might be 100 degrees. You guys have all seen plants that in the middle of summer, they are wilted looking, and you water them and they still stay wilted even though you know there's water available. The plants have closed down all their pores, their stomata, and they're trying to minimize water loss. They're not taking up water because it's just too hot in the soil. So mulch will benefit your plants by allowing them to continue to take up moisture on a hot day. Plus they smother weeds. Plus they discourage a bunch of pests. Plus they actually discourage a bunch of fungal disease because fungal spores live in the soil and will actually splash up on the plants in overhead irrigation. So I like mulch because it does so many things that I hate to do. It makes it so I weed less and water less. So I call it work control. I had talked about crop rotation earlier when we were talking biointensive method. And basically crop rotation is this. Certain plants in the same family, and we're going to talk about families in a minute. Certain plants in the same family share pests, weeds, and disease pressure. And if you plant the same plant family in the same spot year after year, you basically are selecting for disease in that spot. So ideally, you move plants in the same plant families to a different spot every 3 years. And that allows you to decrease the buildup of disease or pests that would affect that plant. Okay. When we say plant families, we mean families because plants have cousins. Believe it or not, the Solanaceae family, which is the nightshades, that is a family I like to talk about because everybody grows it. Half of them are delicious vegetables. The other half are deadly poisons. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes are cousins. They share the same disease. If you plant those plants in the same place every year, you're going to build up your disease in that spot, usually fungal, viral, or bacterial disease. So if you plant tomatoes in one raised bed, then you move them to another raised bed and you put peppers in, you are still in the Solanaceae family. Maybe you have your tomatoes in one spot, Then next year after that, you put your cabbage or your broccoli or brassicas in that spot. Maybe the year after that, you put some cucurbits, maybe do some zucchini or summer squash in that spot. Then year 4, you can come back with tomatoes. But a lot of people say to me, they're like, Tim, hey, that's great, but I have one garden and I'm planting tomatoes in there every year. I can't do a true crop rotation. And people can't. I understand that. Here's what you do if you cannot do a true crop rotation. What you do is this. You use all the other tools in the toolbox you have available to you. You select resistant varieties of plants. There are tomato varieties that you can pick that are resistant to a lot of those bad fungal diseases. You maximize your soil organic matter and your soil health so that you have healthy soil, which leads to a healthy plant. You mulch to make sure that you are keeping a lot of those fungal spores in the soil and not on your plant. You gently water at the base of the plant with a deep soaking instead of using the hose and spraying where that might splash stuff. You do a soil test to make sure that you have enough fertility so that that plant, it can be its best self. So use all your other tools if you can't do a true crop rotation, because you want to keep your plants as healthy as you can so that you get the biggest harvest that you can. So here is our weather predictions, because we're going to talk about what are we going to do right now. Right now being it is February 26th. We are at the end of February. We are staring at planting season very soon. Honestly, if we get a nice warm up in March, I'm going to be putting a ton of stuff in the ground. Here are the weather predictions, and NOAA and the National Weather Service do predictive models. They update each month that give predictions for 1 month, 3 month precipitation chances, temperature chances. This is about a week old, and this is the predictive models for temperature probability and precipitation probability for March, April, and May. And they've been consistently saying, February notwithstanding, that we are going to have a warmer than normal chance for spring. The chance of warmer spring is higher. That's on the left. Now, they've decreased a little of the precipitation chances. They were generally predicting that we were going to have a really wet February, March, and April, and it has been. Now they're predicting at least a little bit of a chance of a wetter than normal March, April, and May. What does that mean for you? I use this when I start seeds in my basement under lights. If I'm looking at this, I'm saying to myself, I have a better than normal chance that I can put lettuce out in the next 2 weeks and grow it and mature it under season extension. And so, even if you're growing in your backyard, you can learn from the things that farmers use, and farmers are weather watchers. They want to know when they can get stuff in the ground. They like to use it for their planning, and you can use those same things as well. But keep in mind this. Outside temperature in the air is different than soil temperature. So on the left is soil, right? This is weather information from the Columbus Station at Waterman Farm on campus. And take a look at the 5 and 10 centimeter soil temperatures. They are in the low 30s, not conducive to plant anything, even though we look at the right side, Logan, Ohio's 10-day weather, we have days in the 50s coming up. But plants live in the soil, and the impacts are not linked perfectly in terms of time. Soil temperature moves slowly in relation to air temperature. It's going to be a long time before that soil temperature is quite where we want it to be. It might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks. We need heat to get on there. At least in Columbus, we have been smothered under 6 to 12 inches of snowy ice for the last 3 weeks. And so even if it's 60 degrees outside, I'll bet you the soil temperatures are going to be about 35, 36 degrees. And so make sure that you're monitoring your soil temperatures for when you plant. And then this is an interesting thing. So we really had some unusual springs the last few springs, and we'll see what happens this spring. You go back to last spring. April and May were cold. They were miserably cold. There were whole weeks that we barely got out of the 40s in that spring. And so our last frost, at least for central Ohio, was May 12th. And that is not too long, except it wasn't just one night where it's been 65 and then we get a little nip at night. It was a miserably cold spring all the way through that. And then it wasn't just a frost. We had freezes in mid-May in Franklin County that lasted days in a row. There were people that planted their tomatoes, they got killed by the frost. They came back, planted more tomatoes, they got killed by the frost again. I know people in my community garden that planted 3 times. You got to wait till the soil warms up, and you have to realize some plants are more susceptible to that. But then you go the year before, 2019, the last frost was April 2nd, and we had actually a hot spring, which did the opposite. We had that, if you remember, we had barely any spring at all. It was like, all right, here's spring, or here's winter. Then we have spring. It lasted for a little bit, and okay, now it's going to be 85 and 90 degrees, and it's May. We'll see what we get this year. But here's a video from my garden, and you look at this, walk down this pathway, and you're like, oh my gosh, boy, it's cold. There's nothing growing except for a few weeds, and it looks just so dismal. What is that, March? Is that April? And this is like May 20th in my community garden in Franklin County, Ohio. Even the trees are behind, right? Because everybody kind of waits for the warming days. Phenology tracks the warming days. And so we'll see what we get this year, but not to just bum everybody out. We're going to have a good spring, I think, at least by the predictive model. So here's a picture of containers. And I took a call from a client this morning, early, before this class when I was checking my email. He wanted to learn where there was some places where he could grow. And I was trying to hook him up with community gardens. At least in Franklin County, that's very difficult to do because we have somewhere between 300 and 500. There's no list of them that is accurate. They change, the managers of them change. A lot of them are in municipalities and there's restrictions on who can grow. But I grow in a community garden. My season is April 1st until October 31st, and then they will plow it down. The reason I am a community gardener is because my yard is deep shade in 95% of it, and the only parts that aren't in shade are my driveway. So I grow in containers. It used to be very difficult to grow in containers inexpensively because a giant container to grow in used to be tons of money. If it was a big terracotta pot or even a big plastic pot of the size needed to grow vegetables, right? Because vegetables need soil for root expansion. But there's new technology now in containers, and those are the two in the front. Those are grow bags, and you can buy grow bags in giant sizes. You can get them 20, 30, 50, 100-gallon size bags. And so they're like mini gardens. So I have some plastic pots in the back that I got at a yard sale for $1 a piece about 15 years ago. I'll never find that deal again. But now you can get grow bags for under $10 a piece that they ship to you, and then you fill them with soil. And so I grow in my community garden, heavy duty in the hot weather, and I am currently growing garlic and spinach in containers under row cover that I can harvest pretty soon, at least the spinach. The garlic won't be ready till summer. But on my driveway, black containers soak up heat, black asphalt soaks up heat. I'm inside city limits. My house soaks up heat. My garage soaks up heat. This has a nice little micro environment that allows me to grow in. So this is a picture from probably last March. In last March, I had top left corner bok choy, get back here, middle spinach. I actually grew that over winter. I planted that Thanksgiving and then covered it and harvested it the following spring. Here's some kale and some romaine, bunch of lettuces right here, and then these are radishes that I planted. So investigate containers if you don't have a back 40 that you can tear up. Here is a picture from probably, well, this would probably be January because all of February was underneath snow. But I have my container garden. I have two that basically I'm just got some mulch on them to protect from erosive loss. I'm going to put lettuce in them that I started in my basement a week or two ago. That'll get planted in the next couple weeks. And then in the 4 containers under the row cover, the front 2 have spinach and the back 2 have garlic. They're just baby plants right now, but boy, they will take off and grow like wild once we get more sun and warmer temperatures. So what can you start right now? There's lots of stuff you can start right now if you have the ability to provide them light, and you need grow lights to do this. Sunny windowsills will not do it, okay? There is no such thing as a sunny windowsill in February in Ohio that is going to give you enough sun to germinate and grow stocky, ready to go seedlings. We just don't have that amount of light. We're less than 12 hours and the sun is very low in the horizon. It's not a lot, and it's not enough to grow these plants that need that. So You can get grow lights, LED ones. The technology is advanced unbelievably. They're inexpensive. I use some different grow lights that are LEDs that I just hang over my plants. But right now, indoors, just about any cool season vegetable that's amenable to transplanting. Lettuce, spinach, arugula, bok choy. I've started most of my brassicas. I do broccoli and I do cauliflower. They are sprouted right now. I planted them a week ago. They will go in the ground probably close to April 1st, which means they're going to grow 4 more weeks under my lights, and they're going to turn into transplants that look like these. These are beautiful, stocky transplants of lettuce, kale. We got some romaine in there. We have some cauliflower and we have some broccoli, and they'll go in the garden later on, but this gives me a jump on them. And then leeks and onions are 2 ones that you can buy plants or you can buy sets later to plant in your garden. But I have started a bunch of those from seed as well, and they're growing really nice under the lights, and they will go out probably around that April 1st as well, weather dependent. So if you don't have space to grow, though, hopefully it's still around. But this is the Logan Community Garden. And I will be honest with you, when I was in Hocking County, the Logan Community Garden was one of the top 5 community gardens that I had visited in all of the state of Ohio. It was huge. There was a giant pile of free unlimited compost. It had a 9-foot deer fence around it to keep the critters out. It had water at the site. You got a nice big plot, full sun. There was no trees or anything near it. And you can see in this bottom right pic, there was actually beehives to provide pollinators, and it was free. So I don't remember the contact person of it. I believe it was somebody at the hardware store had that, but you could probably contact the extension office to find that as well. But if you're looking for a place to grow, at least when I was in Hocking County, the Logan Community Garden was a gem. And then here's a picture. I miss Hocking County. This is the Hocking County Fair. This is exactly what it looked like when I walked out of the front door of my building. The office for OSU Extension Hocking County is on the fairgrounds. And I used to come every day, bright and early, park, walk over, get my breakfast from one of the vendors and take it back to my office. So on that note, contact your extension office if you have any questions about growing. In Hocking County, it's easy to get a hold of any county. The way that you contact your extension office is name of the county.osu.edu. I work in Franklin, that's franklin.osu.edu. When I worked in Hocking, you got a hold of the Hocking County office, hocking.osu.edu.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate you being with us today. I do have just a few questions if you can answer real quickly before we go on your raised beds.
Okay.
Okay. I know that raised beds can be used in various different kinds of material, I guess. I've seen them with straw. I've seen them with wood. Is there a recommendation? And what about treated lumber? I've been told not to use treated lumber because it will seep into the dirt, which then would go into your vegetables you're trying to grow. But if it isn't treated, you're going to probably be replacing it after so long. And then with the straw, if you're using the straw around the beds, does that become all weedy? Does it, when the rain, after so long, does it just start to dissipate or just, deteriorate and go away? What is recommendation there on that? And then the second question on that is, I know I have raised beds, and I feel like every year I'm refilling up the dirt. Is that the process? It's like
Yes.
the rain comes through, it sinks down, you're hauling in more dirt. But that's probably a good thing to have I don't know. I'm just a couple questions there.
Sure. So, one, lumber choices. People make raised beds out of a number of different forms. Treated lumber nowadays is commonly called ACQ lumber. It's different than the old CCE, which is copper chromated arsenic lumber that was very toxic. ACQ lumber still has preservatives in it, and there is a chance, especially with higher organic matter, that you could have some leaching of the chemicals into the root zone around the plants. And so people ask me about treated lumber because you're right. A treated lumber raised bed will last much longer than an untreated lumber raised bed. So what the recommendations would be to actually line it with plastic or something so that there is no wood interaction with the soil, but you still get the benefits of a long-term treated lumber. I generally make my raised beds with untreated lumber. I find that that still lasts like 10 years, believe it or not. And the cost for those boards at $2, $3, $4 a piece, and the peace of mind of knowing that I have no interactions negatively, it is no worry. I did actually just build some raised beds out of cedar. Untreated cedar, naturally rot resistant like that white oak that we looked at. The boards were a little bit more than treated lumber, but they're going to last as long or longer than treated lumber. And that was another sort of peace of mind where I knew I was using something that had no chemical leaching into the soil, very rot resistant, did cost a little bit more. So what's the cost benefit analysis between untreated, treated, and cedar? I don't have that data yet, but there's lots of options for you to build your raised beds with. You could use untreated, you could use treated and use a liner so that there's no interaction with the treated wood, or you could go with some of the other untreated different species of woods that have natural rot resistance. And then
Okay.
when you have raised beds, it is normal to have to put 20% more soil in every single year. And the
Okay.
reason is just like you said, you have some erosive loss, but you have a tremendous harvest loss. Believe it or not, you're turning that soil and organic matter into plants, and then you're eating them, right? A tomato plant that you put in that soil, every tomato that you pull out is nutrients, water. And so that is coming from the soil over time. So I find it normal that you would top a raised bed off probably 20% of soil every year.
Okay. And my last two questions are raised beds typically just for your smaller plants? Can you raise corn in a raised bed? Is there enough depth? Will it hold it there?
Yeah,
Because,
so if I had a 4-foot wise raised bed, I could raise corn in that. The 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 corn spaced would probably be 2 rows within that raised bed. Now, here's the thing you have to keep in mind when you raise corn. And one of the reasons that corn is planted in rows in big, huge patches like that is corn is wind pollinated. And so you generally need a block of at least 4x4 plants in order for good pollination. Every silk on a corn plant leads to a kernel. So every silk has to deliver pollen to turn that kernel into a seed. So, and if you've ever been in a cornfield, when it's in active pollination, there's clouds of pollen. It's amazing. There's bees clustered all through a cornfield. It's unbelievable. So if you were, say, to grow one long row of corn, you're probably going to have very spotty germination. You're not going to have kernels all over that corn. That's why corn is planted in patches, because then the wind comes and you get great germination. So you could do it in raised beds. You maybe would minimize your pathways between your raised beds to say just enough that you could walk through it, 24 inches, 18 inches. And then you're doing in a 4-foot raised bed, you're doing a row of 2, maybe 3 plants. I space my corn plants about 12 inches within a row, and I do my rows about 18 inches wide. And corn is something I do in row gardening in clusters that way because I want to maximize my pollination, which will maximize my ear fill on kernels.
Okay. And last question. You've already showed us some of the greens that are already growing in under your lighting in your house, etc. So are we too late to get started now? And if so, where would we search for seeds?
You can still go online for seeds. Most companies still have stuff in stock. And honestly, I visited a nursery to buy a few seeds in the last couple of weeks, and they still had good availability as well. They're just filling their stuff up that way. So the stuff that I showed you in that slide a little bit ago, that's all stuff you can plant right now. I mean, that was me. I updated that before this presentation. You are good to go. This weekend is a great time to start indoors under the lights. Lettuce, bok choy, all the things, kale, all the things we talked about, planning to get those out in April for transplanting outside into your garden. I seed start because, I can buy cauliflower transplants at the nursery near me, and they're in good shape, and I have no problem with it. But I grow a special variety that is a Asian sprouting variety of cauliflower that's very sweet, and it's different. So I can only get that as seed. I can't find that as a plant. So when I do my own seed starting, generally it's because I like to look through that seed catalog, and I like to pick certain varieties that I'm going to start, which are completely different than what would necessarily be sold at the store.
Okay. Got it.
And I can share with you a bunch of links that you're welcome to post on the Facebook where you
Okay.
post this, that are classes on how to start seeds, classes on, quick videos and things like that that folks can take a look at. Last year, due to COVID, when we switched to all virtual Zooms, I did Zooms on about every topic in growing, from seed starting to container gardening to what to plant now for fall to season extension to how to grow over winter to composting to tomatoes, you name it. And then I just did a website post where I collated them all in chronological order. So we start
Okay.
where they all went in sort of in back order. I restarted them so they're all in like, here's what you do now, here's what you do now, here's what you do now. And so I'll
Perfect.
send you that link and then you can share that with everybody and they
Beautiful.
can follow along there too.
All right. Appreciate it. Well, thank you, Tim, for today. This was wonderful, really informative. So grateful for you joining us.